Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. And welcome all of you to this novelty or this webinar. I wish we're meeting under better circumstances and better conditions, but unfortunately we are meeting under the umbrella of a global crisis. A brief introduction for myself. Originally, I am from Ghana, born and bred in Ghana. I had my undergraduate education at the University of Ghana. Then I proceeded to Canada, where I had my master's, and finally my PhD in public administration from the University of Ottawa. I have been having and conducting these training sessions on public-private partnerships for SETYM International for a very long time now. For a very long time, and this is it's almost 10 years since I've been doing this and I've been experiencing. Just before I go into the main material, I just want to briefly share a story with you. Right now, I live and I teach in Dubai. Something happened during this corona crisis, when Dubai and the whole of the U.A.E was put in a complete lockdown. We're locked down. The only way we could get food and other things was through delivery system. The delivery system is effective, it's efficient. It goes wherever you want to do, whatever you want, however you want it, you can order it to be delivered to you like that. You pay it online, it comes in no time. When the government wanted to feed people who could not afford, it was so easy. They could easily send it and send it to places. They know who is where, they know how to get help to people who needed it. And when they wanted to make sure that they kept people in places to make sure that they feed them, they were able to do it very well. Now, I want to juxtapose the system, the order system here, with what happened in my own country of Ghana, where the lockdown was for 3 weeks. And it was a serious problem. Feeding them, getting critical services to the poor, making sure that people got what they needed. Somebody says the lockdown is based on the idea that the upper to middle class can sit in their bungalows and afford to self-isolate. The poor need to eat, they need to feed, they need to be able to work, especially those that live on the daily services. This brings us to what we are talking about today as public-private partnerships, and the concept of services and infrastructure. This crisis, the coronavirus crisis, has exposed us and governments and public administrators and asked us to confront some very important and serious challenges. How do we create economies? Electronic economies, virtual economies, ICT economies, to take for both the challenges of today and the challenges of tomorrow. How do we build the infrastructure of today and tomorrow, the infrastructure that can help us both in good times and in challenging times like this? How do we partner with the private sector, with NGOs, with civil society, both in good times and in normal times and in a pandemic like this? And that is what this webinar is about, to introduce us to the concept of what we call public-private partnerships. Our primary objective is trying to ask ourselves one simple question: what are public-private partnerships and why public-private partnerships? All over the world right now, if you look at it, even in developed countries, governments and private sector and civil society are all in the same boat, looking for questions, looking for solutions. Government is trying to depend on the private sector, public sector, to develop the vaccine, to develop the challenges, to develop the solutions to address this problem. On the other hand, governments are still dealing with the difficulty of regulations. You go to almost all countries, the problem governments are still having, bureaucracies having, is the concept of regulation. Bureaucracy wants to make sure that every vaccine that is being released, every medication that is being released, and every equipment tool that is being released or being produced by the private sector meets standards. And if at any one particular time that the concept, that the marriage between public and private sector is important, it is now in these periods when governments have come to the realization that they cannot go alone. Government has the bureaucratic power, government has the military power, government has the financial power, but government does not have the expertise. So we want to ask ourselves this question: what are public-private partnerships and why public-private partnerships? If you go back to the concept of public-private partnerships, what are public-private partnerships? This idea emerged around the 1970s and the 1980s. Those of us in governance, we remember this period precisely because two main things happened. These periods were led by two main leaders. In the United Kingdom, it was led by a woman called Margaret Thatcher. That period has now come to be known as what? Thatcherism. Margaret Thatcher moved away from the idea that the state must do everything, from the idea that the state must guarantee everything, from the idea that the state must assure and secure the well-being of every UK citizen. Margaret Thatcher started to shift the idea or the blame or the concept of you taking care of yourself partly to the market, with ideas of privatization and moving the concept to the market. What Margaret Thatcher was saying is that this whole idea of cradle to grave social policies was wrong and that the state couldn't do it. Margaret Thatcher was making a point that the state alone cannot continue to carry the burden. The state did it after World War I, and the state did it after World War II. But the finances of the state were overstretched and the state was never bankrupt. So Margaret Thatcher was saying that Thatcherism was based on this idea or this concept that the state alone cannot do it. So whilst Margaret Thatcher was preaching the state cannot do it, across the pond, as we say in the United States, was another politician emerging, Ronald Reagan. And Reagan was also making the same argument. What Reagan said was that government was not the solution. Actually, government was a problem. Similar things will happen in Canada. So what we couldn't say is that in the industrial world, in Europe and in North America, the idea became crystallized that government alone cannot do it. Government alone cannot provide all the schools. Government alone cannot provide all the hospitals. Government alone cannot provide all the highways, all the bridges, all the dams. That government alone cannot do it. This idea carried on until the 1980s when the United Kingdom pioneered what became known as the Private Finance Initiative, PFIs. The idea of PFIs is to say that, look, it's time that the government to marry the strength of the state with the technological might of the market. And that together, the two of them can find a way to deliver effective and efficient social services, public infrastructure to citizens. Because of the amount of money needed, because of the amount of technology needed, because of the amount of expertise needed, because of the amount of resources needed, that no government alone can do it. So the question you must begin asking yourself is, if some of the richest economies in the world, the United States, Canada, the UK and others, have begun saying that governments alone cannot do it, what about governments in emerging economies? What about governments in developing countries? What about governments that do not have a mature private sector? And that is where governments took the cue. Today, we have over 60 countries. This 14 numbers is conservative, that have developed one form or the other of a public-private partnership. The ultimate objective, the central argument is thus as simple as government alone cannot do it. And once again, we've seen it. As I said, we are in an era of pandemic, and wherever you're coming from, whatever country you are joining me on this seminar from, you've seen it. You've seen your government partnering with private sector. You've seen your government partnering or trying to partner with civil society. You've seen your government partnering with local NGOs. You've seen international collaborations, because the pandemic might have global consequences, but each solution might be local or local. Therefore, so this was how the PPP concept came about. This is how it emerged, the idea that the state alone doesn't have all the answers. This is how it came about. The question we want to ask ourselves is, why public-private partnerships? Why do we need it? Why do we need it? The first reason why we need efficient public-private partnerships is because of what we call population growth, urbanization. The majority of the global population now lives in urban areas. Majority of us now live in urban areas. The challenges of urbanization are huge. We need good, effective, and efficient hospitals to take care of us when we are sick. It costs money. We need good and efficient roads, highways, railways, airports. We need good and efficient educational system and infrastructure. We need good and efficient hospitals, clinics, everything. And the demand for these services just keep increasing. They are not reducing. So the question is, we need more and more of them. This infrastructure challenge, and this is brought about by population, means that we need to invest more and more and more in our public infrastructure, fiscal infrastructure every year. And government alone cannot do it. That's why we need PPPs. We talk about economic growth. So a few years ago, Ghana experienced, my birth country, experienced a dilapidating power crisis. And part of the reason for those crises was because of huge, you could say, unexpected demands on the electrical grid, brought about by people using mobile phones. All over the country, everybody was charging mobile phones. New economic demands expected that pressure on power and resources became huge. The new global economies we are generating, we are developing, depends so much on power and resources. And government alone cannot provide them. We need public-private partnerships in those areas. Increase global competition. Look, the PPP, the coronavirus has just started. We are seeing the competition all over the world. The Chinese are looking for a cure. The Europeans are looking for a cure. The Americans are looking for a cure. Australians are looking for a cure. Africa is looking for a cure and testing cures. Every country is trying to come up with different solutions on how to do it. And we know what happens. The moment this happens and we go back to normal life, whatever form it might take, we know what is going to happen. Every country is competing for foreign direct investment. Every country is competing for all the tourists, to be a tourist attraction. Every country is competing for all these resources. You cannot compete to attract more tourists when you don't have the infrastructure needed for tourists. You cannot compete and win in the race for more people to visit your country and invest in your country when you don't have the basic infrastructure. Global competition means you cannot have all the people visiting when you don't have airports, seaports that are up to par. You cannot be a competitive person in international trade, import and export when your seaport and your airports are not up to par. That's why we need public-private partnerships. We said insufficient or poorly planned public investment in infrastructure. This is especially acute in developing countries. Especially acute among those of us or those countries that don't have enough resources to do this. If you add that to aging and deteriorating public infrastructure, you know what we're talking about. Those of us from developing countries, we've seen this. We've seen highways that have outlived their usefulness. We've seen rail systems that are hardly working. We've seen hospitals, schools that can hardly be called the same there. We have seen public housing. It cannot be called housing anymore. We've seen public transport, the type of buses, the type of roads that are used, aging and cannot move anymore. Telecommunication system. Whilst other people are struggling with 5G, a lot of us are still struggling with basic internet that cannot do things. I was telling somebody, for the past 4 months since this coronavirus started in March, all classes in the U.A.E have gone online. We have no problem at all. We are online teaching day in, day out. Right now, we are conducting exam, everything online. We are sitting at home, students are sitting at home, and teaching is going on effectively. The same cannot be said of my own country in Ghana, because part of the problem is that internet is not so much. Yes, schools and places in major cities in Ghana might be able to do that. But if you were living in my hometown of Truman, the portion of Northern Ghana, you probably will not be able to do that. So we have aging infrastructure. And finally, risk of public safety and increased infrastructure costs. So we need public-private partnership precisely because of these infrastructure challenges in our countries. So now that we know why we need them, the question becomes, what is the PPP concept? So what does the PPP means? When we talk about a public-private partnership, it refers to a contract, a performance-based contract between a public entity and a private consortium. The literature tells us that for an effective and efficient public-private partnership contract, at least it must be 25 years contract. Now, usually I'm asked this question. Yes, so a government signs a 5-year contract, 10-year, 20-year contract with a private company. It's not called a public-private partner. It doesn't qualify. And that's the problem we have. Sometimes, especially those of us, the governments in developing countries, we do this. We jump into things without knowing what it is. If you are signing a public-private partnership contract with a private consortium, and it is less than 25 years old or long, it is not a public-private partnership. There's a reason. Very soon we'll see the reason why longevity is important. In Canada, the government of Ontario signed a highway contract for 99 years. The government of Quebec signed a highway contract for 75 years, 85 years. There are public-private partnerships, highways and hospitals and airports in the United States that are 60 years, 70 years, 80 years old. The idea is that we see that for it to be a public-private partnership, it must exceed what we call the useful life of the asset. We define a useful life as it refers to a period for which an infrastructure is available and able to deliver public services according to predefined quality and criteria. Think about it this way. Think about it this way. If you spend $100 million on an airport, or you spend $100 million on a highway, on a major highway between two big cities in your country, as a PPP, and you now tell the private consortium that they have 10 years to recoup their investment and make their profit and hand it over to you. 10 years to recoup $100,000, $100 million. We know that what that means. The private consortium is going to increase toll fee. It's going to have higher toll fees. Now that is where you begin to run into problem with local users of the highway. Population is going to rise up against the higher tolls because they're like, this is too expensive, we cannot pay. All of a sudden you have clashes. If you live in a democracy, these things affect government's decision. Governments become unpopular. What happens? The government now tries to cancel the contract because there's an election coming. Citizens are doing this. It's because of some of these reasons that, so if the private consortium is forced to make all this money within 10 years, which is the life cycle of the company, then it has to charge more to make more. Assuming you make it 20 years, you can negotiate for lower tolls. 25 years, lower and lower. And that is usually one of the ways we do it. That's what we say. Because remember we said that public-private partnerships are what? Performance-based contracts. And almost every public-private partnership must be based on the concept of a user fee. If you cannot put a user fee on it, you cannot and should not make it a public-private partnership. If it cannot be something that people will pay whilst using it, in the kind of a demand thing, don't do a public-private partnership. And secondly, we've said this, and we're going to say it here, about the don'ts. We'll go back about it. But that's why we always advise governments, never ever do a public-private partnerships with anything that has to do with ICT and technology, information and communications technology. The reason is simple. These days, we live in an era where ICTs change faster than you think. In a year, there can be 3, 4, 5 upgrades to an existing ICT system. In 3 years, in 2 years, I don't know the last time we were in 3G, we've gone to 4G, we are now going to 5G. So imagine you were locked up in a contract with the company for 30 years for a 3G service. Now it's 5G, what do you do? I'll give you an example. When the concept of public-private partnership started, the national telecom company in Lebanon signed a contract with a public-private company. But by that time, they didn't have the technology to send text messages. So the contract they signed was just over voice. So they says, we charge voice. It was just over voice. Everything was voice, voice, voice. 1 year after the contract, the technology for SMS came in. And the private consumer started making a lot more money from the voice technology, from the SMS data technology, and not the voice. The government wanted to change the terms of the contract. They could not. Finally ended up in court, and that thing became a failure. So that is why we say if there's any area you should not go into a long-term marriage like a public-private partnership for 30 years, is IT and technology. You can do it for a highway. Highways are there forever. You can do it for a seaport, an airport. You can do it for a dam. You can do it for a railway. You can do it for public transport. You can do it for public housing. The idea is this. The idea is simple. Get a service, something that is based on utility, something that is based on user pay, user fees, and make sure that you can deliver the same services for a long period, 30 years, 25 to 30 years or more. You're still going to need that highway. You're still going to need that airport. You're still going to need that seaport. You're still going to need that public transport. You're still going to need that rail system. You're still going to need that prison. I hope not. You're still going to need that water system. Big water dam, big water treatment, sewage treatment, you're still going to need it. User fees and utility fees. So to qualify for a public-private partnership, this is one of the key features. Another key feature we say is that it's an output-based contract. A public-private partnership must focus on output. For a public-private partner, you are paying for a result. You are paying for an outcome. You are not paying for a process. And this is very, very important, because sometimes in my country, Ghana, there's something that became popular called judgment debts. So sometimes what happens before you realize you are found in a tangle of things that even the lawyers have struggled to untangle. Because what you don't do is that the outputs are not very specified. So before you realize, the government and the consortium are caught up in the process. But if you are doing a public-private partnership, remember this, you are paying for outcome, you are paying for results, not for the process. It is why you must leave the process to the private consortium. Now, as governments sometimes, and as senior public servants that you are, sometimes it is difficult to let it go, for us to let go. So now we are like a mother who feels to recognize that his boy is now 18 years, is now 20 years, is now 25 years and ready to be independent. So now we behave like a mother who doesn't realize that her daughter is now 25, 30 and is married and is no more the small girl that she needs anymore. It's the same thing. Maybe you were in charge of the highway system. Maybe you were in charge of the railway system, the public transport system, the airport. All of a sudden, it's a consortium. You still want to maintain all this control in making all these decisions, interfering in the operations of the private sector. I said you don't have to do that. The contract you are trying to sign at this one time must be an output-based contract. Hold them only accountable for specified results, specified outputs, specified outcomes. and give the private consortium the freedom, the free will to use their immense expertise, technological expertise, innovation, financial expertise, deliver the service you want. So in both the design and construction phases and operational phases, remember that's what I'm saying. If you are signing a public-private partnership with a company that you are unable or unwilling to clearly specify the outputs that you want and you need, don't do it. It cannot be vague. You should be specific. That is important. Key number 3, look for in a public-private partnership system. It is something we call payment upon delivery. Payment upon delivery is important. I'm sure we've all heard about stories where governments have paid for services and it's not there. We've all heard stories where the payments have been made, but the road that is to be constructed is not there. The payments have been made, the money has been spent, but that highway is not there, the dam is not there. Payment has been made, everything has done, but the hospital that was supposed to be built has not been built. The rail system has not been built. The water system has not been built, but payment has been made. This follows from what we said that the public-private partnership contract must be what? An output-based contract. It means that it is output-based and you specifically define what you want or what you need, then you only pay when you get it. So when you combine output-based with payment upon delivery, you get what we call a performance-based contract. Four, and I cannot say this more. The private sector must bring some of their own money. This is just a management and operational contract. Because you see, if there's one thing we know is this: private companies know how to manage their own money. They will protect their own money and their own investment. Usually there's one thing we say. Public-private partnerships sometimes lead to what? Cost sharing and risk sharing. The risk sharing is a very important thing. In subsequent, I'm just talking about key features of this process because we don't have a lot of time to go into details. This is a whole 2-week course. I'm just trying to suppress into 30 minutes. But the point is clear. If we say that one of the benefits of public-private partnership is cost sharing, then cost must actually be shared. If you're building a highway and with a private consortium, and for the private company to manage it for 30 years, and the total cost of the contract is $20 million, then you have to share the cost. Because you see, once you share the cost, and the private sector puts their money where their mouth is, that is when they can be innovative, that is when they can be creative, and that is when they can minimize cost. That is when they can limit penalties because of risk. It's only when they have a vested interest in that contract. I've seen where government just say, well, we finance all this, government give a sovereign guarantee to a private company, and the company goes all over the world looking for money to come. Imagine you just do that and give your sovereign guarantee to a company, say, you go around all the world, look for the money and come with our sovereign guarantee. And then you are surprised that the next day the company folds up and runs away and hasn't paid the money. Where is the risk you are sharing with them? It's your risk, it's your sovereign guarantee. It's very, very important. The feature we talk about is that what we call a private sector stewardship. That's what we are saying. What that simple means. If it's a partnership, if you cannot trust a private company, that's fine. But the details in the contract must make sure that you can hold them accountable for performance. That means that you should be able to let go. You should be able to let a private company have enough independence, enough freedom to innovate, to be creative. You can achieve this by getting what we call an independent certifier. The contract says that if you complete 30% of the project, you get paid this $10 million. You get a third party independent certifier. This is completely part of the course. Each of these features is a lecture in and of itself, and the course on itself on PPPs. That if you take the full course, we will go into, but just talking about how to do that. Okay? Let's talk about the main features, therefore. We talked about why public-private partnerships, but this is the main reason. We say one of the reasons why it does is called optimal risk sharing. Almost all of you here have been in public sector, in governments. And throughout, you've seen one risk or the other. You've experienced one risk or the other. I was doing this training one day in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and I was telling my students, or the participants, they told me a story where this company flew down from Australia to come and do their PPP negotiations. The company flew 20 people to come to their country to negotiate this contract. 20. Of the 20, the actual 5 of them represented some of the biggest insurance companies in Australia. Just insurance alone, to talk about risk. 3 of them represented 2 of the biggest legal firms. They brought 20 people to negotiate this contract. The government of the country they're going to, I cannot mention the name, was represented by 5 people. They didn't even have a specialist on insurance alone, just insurance alone on that team, on the government team. When you are coming to do public-private partnerships, and we're talking about millions and millions of money on the table, and when we are talking about the potential of a private consortium managing a lucrative public infrastructure for 20, 30 years, and the amount of money the investor can make, they will come to you with their A team. Mostly they come in what we call a private consortium. We all know what consortium means. Usually it's one person who sits down and put up a team, an A team. He will get the best insurance company in their country to represent them. He will get the best bank in their company to represent them. He will get the best engineering company to represent them. Literally, they will assemble the A team to come to you. And part of the reason why they're doing this is because of cost sharing and risk sharing. If you don't negotiate very well, if you're unable to put your best foot forward, it will not happen. You're talking about service specifications. I've seen a hand raised. We'll come to all the hands that are raised later on, and we don't have the feature now to do back and forth on hands, okay? Payment based upon service availability and performance, and then a public authority retains control of all services at all times. Yeah, so now when it comes to public-private partnerships, we usually talk about 2 main types of infrastructure. And this webinar, or in this series, when we will come in the normal session we do every year, we look at 2 main types of infrastructure: social infrastructure and economic infrastructure. And we know economic infrastructure include things that help generate economic activity. transportation, energy, utilities, and communications assets. These are the foundations of any country's economic reform. And these are the areas where it's excellent or is best to involve or to engage a public-private partnership. So if you are thinking about public-private partnership, this is the time. One of the main reasons why you actually need a public-private partnership now in this coronavirus era, when this global pandemic is, think about it. Think about how much money you would need to build the roads, the bridges, the hospitals, the airports, the rail systems, the seaports. Governments are there with, government fundings are there with. So because government budgetary allocations have all been thrown outboard now. Price of major commodities, especially oil, is almost down. And I'm sure every finance minister all over the world is now sitting down to revisit their figures and say, where do we go from here? That is the challenge. That's a challenge. The opportunity is the private sector might have the money. And the private sector now senses that the government is literally and figuratively hungry, needs money, needs better assistance to help these projects. So think about it. You have the demand. The private, you have the demand, you need us. The private companies have the money. You need them, they need you. The question is how you are able to package these projects to solve the problems. Global economies are down. Companies are going to come up and they're going to need more help. So that's what we are saying, that so it is better to use public-private partnership right now, especially since your finances are not good. And the best places, the best sectors of the economy to use public-private partnerships are in these visible economic infrastructure areas. Social infrastructure, on the other hand, we don't see. Social services, we don't see them. You can use, or you should use public-private here too. But here usually there are some small problems, there are issues. Take public-private prisons. Yes, there are public-private partnership prisons all over the world. There are some in Canada, there are some in the United States, there are some in Europe. What do you do? How do you maintain membership? How do you pay the private consortium? By number of prisoners? Does that mean that if crime goes down, you don't send people to prison, how do you pay them? That becomes difficult. A sports stadium, yes, you can build a sports stadium, but what happens? We've all seen, for those of you that follow soccer, we've seen what happens in Brazil and even in South Africa after the World Cup. What happens if you cannot fill the stadium? It's a public-private partnership stadium. What happens if you cannot fill it after the tournament? And so the point we're making is that because of this, sometimes public-private partnerships become more challenging when it comes to this social infrastructure. And that is why mostly we try to say, ideally, you should go to fiscal infrastructure, economic infrastructure. But also because social infrastructure also raises another question. If you are a citizen and you are sick and you are admitted at a hospital, are you a client of the hospital or you are a citizen in need of service? If you are a citizen and you are arrested and you are sentenced to prison, should the prison service, should the prison see you as a client or as a citizen? So forth and so forth. So mainly, social infrastructure, because it tends to be selective and because it tends to be difficult to quantify and sometimes to deny people, it will raise specific challenges for public-private partnerships. So in this era of pandemics, especially when global financing may be tight and especially when there will be tight competition in the private equity market and private sector to get money, it's better to steer your money to economic infrastructure. at this time. We are running out of time. The question is that why should the private sector, and I've just made this point, economic activity is so down and so low now. Private sector will need all the contracts they can get. And because they also know that the economy is low, you now have the power to say negotiate again. Listen, the economy is no good. Every economy is no good. It's not as if economy A is good, economy is bad. So it gives both of you strength to go. So government, you now have more than a greater need for infrastructure. At the same time, private companies have substantial amount of capital available for investment. In other words, you need each other. There's a huge demand and the supply is there. You need each other. So this pandemic challenges also provides good opportunities for governments, for you to be able to successfully negotiate and get a good deal. Because they need you, the private company needs you, so you need them. You cannot use the virus as an excuse not to do that. Okay, we are running out of time. And like I said, these are the main players that you'll be dealing with. Investment banks, commercial banks, private equity firms. But all these companies also face challenges and financial crunches now. In the good old days, they could say, but now they cannot also afford because they also have challenges to meet. And for the governments, and why? There are more opportunities for infrastructure, more stable flows and returns, and variant risk profiles. Then we say that state or public finances, every government has an infrastructure deficit. That is just true. Think about it this way. Before this coronavirus, if somebody told you that a time will come when America will have an illness where America cannot provide PPPs for its citizens, you will not believe it. You would think that it's a Hollywood movie. If somebody told you a time would come when America will not have beds for its sick people, you will not believe it. You would think it's a Hollywood movie. But if somebody were to tell you that a time would come when American health system will be stretched to ensure that it will resemble that of a developing country, you will say it only exists in Hollywood. It's happening now. Because of all these projects, all these challenges, governments need the private sector and need them more than ever. The data is to the tango. Yes, and also over the years, I'm trying to go a little bit faster now because our time is almost completely up. Private companies, sectors have moved from just being people who just fund infrastructure projects to they've now evolved. So private companies, they are no more interested in just giving you money or just build your highway. No, because they realize that they make limited money then. But if the highway has a 50-year lifespan, what if they are part of managing the highway? Imagine they are part of managing the highway, and imagine every day all the tolls. And if 2,000 vehicles walk on this highway, and they receive all the tolls coming to them, and they are sure that they can receive a minimum of these 10,000 tolls for the next 30 years. Oh, and by the way, they know that the traffic is going to increase. So they've moved away from just being providers of money to being builders, project development, service providers, and now to program delivery partners. That means that private funding have also decided that they want to be in this marriage for the long haul because they see they will make more money. Say it's an airport, and they just give you 10 million to build the airport, and you pay them the next 5 years with their interest. Okay, they make let's say 15-20% interest on the $10 million. But they're asking themselves, what if they were to partner you and manage this together? The two of you should manage this airport for the next 30 years. And all the funding, all the deposit, every financial arrangement of the airport comes through this bank, this financial consortium. They get to make more money. So you should know this when you are negotiating with the private companies. They need you in as much as you need. You get something like this. Public sector provides solidarity, openness to public, regulation, equity, stability, continuity. Private sector comes with creativity, dynamism, access to finance, knowledge, innovation, performance. You're able to bring these two together, especially in this period of crisis. To be able to unleash potentials that public-private partnerships offers. The benefits there, but just go through them. Improve quality of service delivery to your population. Accelerate progress completion stages. All these are possible. Safety for private parties to perform. We made this point. If you are both in the contract and you are both joined at the hip for the next 30 years, and they know that the success of the project depends upon your success and your success depends upon them, then they have an incentive to perform better. The benefits. Okay. Before I conclude, what I'm going to say is this. The pandemic brings a lot of challenges and brings a lot more pressure to public, economic, and social infrastructure. But you can see the silver lining behind the pandemic too. Immediately we return back, or we are supposed to return back to normal life, or whatever forms it takes. The private company need you, and you will need them to complete the abandoned projects. As finance ministers and planning ministers and government and public leaders are dealing with shrinking budgets, challenges, private companies are thinking where to move next, what to do next, with opportunities. The demand and supply will be there. Your ability to rise up to this leadership challenge, try to harness the power of the market with the might of the state, make the difference between the leaders and the governments that emerge at the other end successfully, those who fail to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joshua, for this very interesting introduction to PPPs. Good morning to all of you from Montreal, Canada. Good afternoon to our friends from West and Central Africa, as well as good evening to our friends in Asia. You were more than 50 joining us from all over the world, from Dominican Republic to the Caribbeans, West Africa, again from Ghana, from Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Bangladesh, just to name few. My name is Jean-Michel Delagrave. I'm director of SETYM International, and I have the pleasure to be with you this morning to animate this very brief Q&A session. We don't pretend to go through all of the subjects and the questions that could come to mind in dealing with the PPPs in such a short time. But Joshua, if we can take just a few minutes to answer a few of them. Again, there's a lot of the subject really arose a lot of interest because I see a lot of questions. Just to name few, a lot of them comments and questions were about how applicable, or what would be the best ingredients you would need to realize successfully these PPPs in developing countries, either Bangladesh or West Africa or Central Africa. There's a lot of skepticism, not about PPPs themselves, but about the specific context of developing countries, like it is with the issue of corruption, like Mr. Cletus Kayanwe mentioned, or like Mr. Abdul Kanzer or Mr. Rahman from Bangladesh rose. How can it be applied successfully in these social and political context.
Thank you very much. Let me take that. The first solution, the first way to do this, the very first thing to do is to have a competent PPP team. It's knowledge. And there's no way to make this again and again and again. Jean-Michel, that's the reason I was giving the example. I've seen this happen. You had a consortium, and you've seen, if you see an actual consortium going into any country to negotiate a PPP contract, they don't just send 1 or 2 people to go negotiate this contract. They don't do that because they know what is at stake. They go Highway 417 in Ontario. It is supported by the RBC. RBC is the biggest bank in Canada. It's supported by some of the biggest financial and how do you call it, insurance companies that the country has. So usually the problem is the consortium outmatches and outclasses you with their expertise and with their knowledge. And before you realize you are, I wish I could use the right word, but I cannot use it. Before you realize you are in trouble. So the first thing to do is to build your local knowledge. Now, secondly, as I said, we have this idea we call siloization in management in most developing countries. So the Minister of Finance wants to keep everything to their chest. The Ministry of Trade wants to keep everything to their chest. The Attorney General or the legal departments don't want to share, nobody wants to share. They are working in what we call siloization, like silos. They are not sharing ideas. So before you realize, you don't actually know what is happening with one side or the other, and then you run into problems. Private consortiums don't do that. They put together a team, and the team talks to each other and builds their capacity. So they have a risk or insurance team, they have a finance team, they have a legal team, and this team works together. So another way you can build in developing countries is especially like this. If one ministry wants to negotiate, the Ministry of Roads or Highways wants to negotiate a highway in a PPP, it shouldn't be something done by that ministry alone. Why can't they have representatives from, you can even hire, you can rent them. Say it is Ghana, there's the National Insurance Commission. Why don't you tax them as insurance advisors? You know what I mean? Yeah. There are banks. Why don't you loan the financial aspect to a fund? So in other words, if you also bring these people, then you are getting yourself in a position where you can compete with this multi-million-dollar private consortium. Thirdly, we need to learn how to develop bankable projects. That's what I'll give you another small example at the University of Ghana. The University of Ghana decided to go in a kind of partnership with private companies to build student hostels. But the university gave these hostel operators about 10 years or so to hand them over. Now, you know what immediately happens, right? So a private builder is saying, okay, I need to make this amount of money quickly within 10 years and recoup. So what do? Every year they keep just astronomically increasing the user fees, the fees for the building. So students are rising up against the universities, and then you find it is. That's what I say. That is not a good bankable one. It's a university and there always be demand for accommodation. Why limit it to 10 years? Why not make it 20, 30 years? So the point is the ability to develop and implement bankable and performance or output-based projects is one of the bane.
Exactly. I think it reaches well the comment or question of Mr. Aminul Islam, who said that really lies into the lack of expertise in negotiating these contracts. But because PPPs are basically a contract agreement, if you don't negotiate well, it's like everything in life, you end up having a bad product or a bad service. It's not different in that matter. We have just to take one or two more. Mr. John Malivo, who asked, do you have a concrete example of recent projects that were declared force majeure because of the COVID-19?
COVID just started, so
yeah. So I guess it's pretty recent, not yet, but
exactly. But I think it can be, and I won't be surprised. I mean, as I said, we are just in it. Let's see. I'm sure there will be a lot of governments or private companies that may want to go the route of force majeure. But I would think that instead of governments doing that, they should rather say, look, it can provide an opportunity because everybody knows, and this is not one of the things. If you're a government of Ghana, or whether you're a government of Canada, America, Australia, or Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, nobody can say it's because of your fault. Nobody can say it's, let me go the road, it's corruption. No. Nobody can say it's ineffective. No. So it is something that everybody understands. That means that you probably will have a very, very legitimate reason to renegotiate. So why don't you use the experience of the formal negotiation? You know, if you didn't do a good job earlier, why don't you learn from it? Like, okay, let me say, whether you believe in God or you believe in Allah or whatever you believe in, you've been given a second chance. Use it.
Yeah, I think it's a great advice, because not everything can be predicted, whatever the situation, even though it's worse than we could have expected a few years back. There's always going to be some things like this unexpected happening, either a political crisis or a social one like this one. Indeed. So I think we'll stop there, because we already took more than what we predicted of 45 minutes, because it was so interesting. For those of you who would like to listen again to this introduction on PPP, please, you can go on our website and the recording will be there. As well as if you want to go and learn more about PPPs and more deep, you can register to one of our seminars that Joshua or another expert will deliver in the upcoming months, as soon as the situation make it possible.